I would now like to present Dr. Ike Wilson, the president of JSOU, and Command Sergeant Major Shane Shorter, who will set the scene for the forum with a short video and opening comments. Dr. Wilson and Sergeant Major Shorter, the floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Dr. Ike Wilson, president of the Joint Special Operations University. And first, let me thank all of you for joining us today for this quarter's Joint Special Operations University Future of SOF Forum. And again, as our gracious host mentioned up front, Lieutenant Colonel Charlie Fain, this quarter's forum is going to focus on this theme, this topic of the fourth age of SOF, use and utility of special operations forces in a new age. I first want to thank all of you for joining this morning. And second, I want to thank my partner in thinking, doing here in leadership of the education activity on behalf of the SOF enterprise and the U.S. Special Operations Command, Command Sergeant Major Shane Shorter, who is our command senior enlisted leader for the Joint Special Operations University. What we're going to do this morning, and we're going to try to keep this to about 25 minutes or so, is same as we attempt to do for every quarterly forum, Future of SOF forum. And that is to put some ideas on the table, put some framings around the two-day event of consultative forum and discussion, and frankly, to provoke, to put some ideas on the table that provoke, that critical appraise where we've been, where we are today, and to do some forecasting of where we might be, what all that past and present may portend for where we need, where we want, and where we, again, most importantly, need to go into the future. We call this a scene setter. And so for the next few minutes, myself and Command Sergeant Major Shorter are gonna try to do a quick exploration, a quick framing, and hopefully provoke along the way. We're gonna use some slides as backdrop. We promise this is not gonna be a PowerPoint presentation. But we're going to use the slides to, frankly, slide in and squeeze in a few extra 10,000 words that we simply don't have the time this morning to go through and exhaust. But to get us started, I'm going to start and I'm going to hand it over to my partner here, Command Sergeant Major Shorter, and then we're just going to kind of go back and forth to lay out some of this dynamic change that has gone on. Some scholars say a takeoff moment around the year of 2013, certainly spurred by all the Springs movement, starting devotedly so going back to at least the year 2006 with the orange and green movements in the Ukraine then, as it is now in Iran, and of course the Arab Springs springing from there ever since. We want to talk about that accelerative moment in the context of three previous ages of SOF, going back to the World War II period. When we say three ages of SOF prior to this fourth that we're exploring these two sessions, we're really talking about organizational SOF. SOF as an organization, as an institution, as an enterprise, as a profession. To get us started in this back to our futures framing, but also a mindset and an approach to reconsidering and rediscovering the use, utility, and frankly, the identity of joint combined cross-service and allied and partnered special operations and special operations forces. That back to our futures approach requires us to grapple with at least three big questions. I want to state those up front and then put some ideas on the table before I turn it over to Command Sergeant Major Shorter to kind of give us a brisk walk through the previous three ages. This rediscovery that we're on, and this 2 days are gonna really kick off that rediscovery moment, must begin with these three big questions of great and grand geostrategic weight. We have to grapple with these. First, how is the character of global geopolitical competition changed? How has it changed? How is it changing? And to what ends? Implications, impacts, good, bad, ugly. Second question, related to the first, derivative of the first. What does this portend, therefore, for the future of special operations and special operations forces through the remaining 2020s, at least for the next 30 years? Thirdly, what impacts on and implications for special operations and special operations forces going forward amid all this change? We have to reconsider everything to include the classic 12 core tasks and activities. Are they the same for the fourth age as they have been for the previous third age, frankly, for the previous 3 ages? If so, which remain and endure? Which must change? How does configuration of all 12 in terms of lead and follow activities? How do we need to think about all those things? Competencies, join and combine. Do the core activities, instrumentation, use and utility of special operations through special operations forces, are those activities the same as joint combined competencies? Provocatively, we say no. And so the next 2 days, we're going to unpack that and explore why we believe the answer to that question is more than likely no. SOF's value proposition, again, this rediscovery. What is the SOF value proposition for the fourth age, and how much is it all that different from the previous 3? This sets up a conditioned state of reconsidering, as I said, just about everything, including force structure, the manning, training, equipping, what we call Title 10, Section 167, roles and responsibilities, force development, force modernization, and even the force design itself. Finally, what does all this mean in the context of some of the popular forms and contexts and terms that are being used in the 2022 draft national security strategy, the defense strategy, and the military strategy? What does all this mean and portend for the nation through its Vanguard force, Joint Combined Special Operations, for what we're calling active gray zone campaigning? And again, finally, how does this all come together to shape and reshape SOF identity? Now, again, this morning, we want to share just a few ideas of some of the things we think we've rediscovered from that Back to Our Futures examination. I want to start really quick with a couple of pictures and where SOF has been for the past 2+ decades, particularly that third age. And so if we could go to the next slide, please, or the first slide, should be slide 2. Okay, it's often said that art imitates life, so I like to start these kind of scene setters and talks with a picture. And so let's start here. This piece of art, it's called James Dietz's Call to Colors, was commissioned by the United States Army Command and General Staff College by the class of 2002 in commemoration of the tragic terror attacks of September 11th, 2001. This print was intended to commemorate a moment that defined an era. We call it the GWAT era in hindsight, that third age of SOF. It was also commissioned as well to mark at least 2 generations of armed services and civilian national security and defense professionals, back then, once and young, who were baptized in the fires of the global war on terror, or the GWAT. Now, what do we see in the image very quickly? What lessons might we gather from future learning? I'll share the lessons that I think it portends for me professionally and personally. First thing I think it shows is a failure of preventative deterrence, integrated or otherwise, and a realization that integrated statecraft solutions approaches are not just nice to have, nice to do. Folks, they are essential to win, much less to live and survive in these new compound security dynamics of a fourth age. Second thing I think it shows, sadly and tragically, is a reactionary posture and an underpreparedness. Necessary change only coming in the smoldering wake of another America's first battle. A first battle loss of a new war we failed to completely recognize and respect for what it was all along, and was forecastable and forecasted prior to the strikes of 9/11 themselves. The twin wars of Afghanistan and Iraq were born out of the dust and wake of our own United States Twin Towers, wars defining of the third hard age of SOF. But then let's look to the left of that portrait, to the far left of the frame, and I think it shows a little bit of light, a promise of new light at the end of a darkened tunnel, hope through new intention, the benefits of anticipation and being anticipatory perspective, and the benefits of foresight. SOF leader operators at the far left end of this frame at the vanguard of change. If we go to the next slide, please, slide 3. A little bit about the last 20 years. 20 hard years of vanguarding adaptations, innovations, and leading change through what became, again, the GWAT and the GWAT era. Finding SOF focus on the so-called hard power, 4 or 5 of the classic 12 soft smart power core tasks and activities. Didn't mean that the full 12 were not important, but they certainly took a backseat to the direct action, counterterrorism, and counter VEO and crisis response tips of the spear for the last 21 years. What did this culminate in? It culminated in the haggard military withdrawal from Afghanistan, despite all the exquisite battle activities in the conduct of those core tasks to deal with the monsters that presented themselves to all of our nations on September 11, 2001. All that hard work that bore through tough witness to, and with the military withdrawal of August of 2021, what we all had to bear tough witness to, and many of us offering whatever best we had to offer at the time to advise and assist in that military withdrawal, all this marking not just an end to America's so-called longest war, but marking an ending to SOF's third age. Now, in a moment, I'm going to turn it over to Shane, and we'll get to those prior historic ages in a rapid fire in a moment. Next slide, please, slide 4. What does this all start to portend and it start to reveal? I would say a couple of things here. First, SOF, like the nations that they serve, are at yet another threshold crossing, similar to the 9/11 threshold crossing. This one, largely described and defined as one of compound security and driven by a compound security dilemma. Next slide, slide 5. Now, this new character of global geopolitical competition demands a use and utility of special operations and special operations forces that is equally compounded. Now, what do I mean by that? What I mean is it has to be a comprehensive combination of all the skills, techniques, operational methods, and tradecraft of all past ages of SOF, all that amplified by 21st century emergent technologies. Folks, we believe nothing less than this kind of back to our futures philosophy, mind view, and approach to rediscovering SOF's full role, purpose, and identity will suffice. A comprehensive understanding of the changing character of geopolitical competition and the environment of conduct, first and foremost, is prerequisite for true strategic leadership. And education, yes, education, is the key to knowledge and understanding. Can we have the next slide, please? Slide 6. I want to speak briefly about this phenomenon called compound security. I'm just going to point out a couple of things. All this compound security dilemma dynamic is changing the timings, spacings, and presenting new purposes, new demands, new obligations. And we call this a new operational overview. Couple of things that will impact future use, utility, and identity of special operations, join and combine. Conflicts at the scene, demanding SOF return to its original value proposition of discrete as our nations need it in exquisite operations at the periphery, indirect applications of force, full continuum of conflict, not just the high end, but preventively, doing that Sun Tzu thing at the seams, at the nexes and nodes between tectonic plates of geopolitics and between those locations and those dynamics that exist between geography, human physical terrain, and human terrain at the state or systemic level, and most importantly, at the place where people live, subsystemic, subsystem, substate, population-centric arenas of SOF activity. Positional advantage, and I'll speak to this again a little bit later. Positional advantage, once again, being paramount in the sense of positional advantage, not just in a physical sense, but also in a virtual sense, ideationally, mindset-wise. Next slide, please. It's a build. A little picture that explains a lot of this complication, this wickedness, this complexity, and yes, this compounding dynamic of the compound security environment that defines the fourth age. Just a couple of things to say here. The graphic really speaks volumes. Sources of conflict, frankly, sources of opportunity. towards a relative peace as we can come to re-know it lies at reconciling, striking a strategic rebalance between these underlying root causes and currents in these overarching dynamics. Enough said on the slide. There are a lot of videos on the YouTube JSOU site, a 4-part series that goes into detail, as well as some reading materials on the governing dynamics. There are at least 9, as we have discovered in our research, that govern and define and describe this compound security dilemma and situation. Next slide, please. What's happening at some of these scenes? World's return really to a pre-20th, maybe even pre-19th century, 21st version of old school mercantilism. We call it geomercantilism. That's a big word. What does it mean? It means going back to more transactional, beggar thy neighbor, self-help international relations, both within states and without states, defining how states interact. This is at the heart of describing, defining, and characterizing what we call great power transition, great power competition, and if not regulated in balance, escalation ladders regulated and controlled can become runaway contagion into the high end of the spectrum of peace and warfare, becoming great power conflicts and wars, systems changing wars. Case in point, Ukraine, and the attempt to balance in a way that satisfies the security needs and the dilemmas, the human security needs and dilemmas for and by the Ukrainian people in the heart of Ukraine, while doing so in a manner that controls the escalation ladder, preventing a wider contagion war from kicking off. The role of special operations in those types of moments, at those scenes, at those nexus locations, has always been vital and critical. The fourth age portends the same. Next slide, please. At this point, let me turn it over to Shane, and Shane's gonna walk us through and explain a little bit of that value proposition of SOF, going back and walking us through that history over the last three ages. Shane, over to you.
Hey, thanks, Dr. Wilson. Appreciate it. And thanks again to all of you for giving us an opportunity to talk about the future of SOF. Dr. Wilson has already started to describe some of the characteristics of the world in which our SOF operators must compete and win today and tomorrow. But it's helpful, I think, to review, where we've come from, not just because it's part of our identity, but also because it contains rich lessons that our community already learned through hard experience. Dr. Wilson, Will Irwin, and others are in general agreement that we have evolved through 3 major and modern phases or ages since World War II, when we began to see SOF developed and deployed in a very deliberate way. Special operations predated World War II, of course. We had Rogers Rangers in the French and Indian War, Colonel Francis Marion and his militia during the American Revolution, and Confederate Colonel John Mosby's Rangers in the American Civil War, to name a few. The common characteristics of these early examples were that they were quickly organized to meet an immediate operational need, and they were just as quickly disbanded when the conflict ended. This alone is a common thread that runs through our history, and one that informed the development of soft truth number 4. Competent SOF cannot be created after emergencies occur. In any case, modern special operations forces can generally trace their lineage to World War II, when operational requirements of theater commanders generated the creation of highly specialized units in every service. They were deactivated after the war, quickly revived to support the Korean War, and then deactivated again. What we took away from this first stage was that SOF demonstrated significant value in large-scale combat operations, not just by executing precision operations, but also by cultivating resilience and resistance in local populations across multiple continents. The second age of SOF can generally trace its origin to Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev's January 1961 speech, in which he declared that the USSR would support wars of national liberation around the world. This convinced newly elected US President John F. Kennedy that the US military needed to develop a strong counterinsurgency capability. So as I was saying, this convinced newly elected President John F. Kennedy that the US military needed to develop a strong counterinsurgency capability, and that SOF would serve as the key facilitator of this effort because of their expertise in irregular warfare. This triggered a 20-year period marked by a significant expansion in the size of the force. The next major evolution was motivated by the failed Iranian hostage rescue mission in 1980, when extraordinarily talented operators from each service collectively failed in spectacular fashion. This drove significant reforms across the conventional military and within SOF, initiating a third age that featured a major organizational change, including a congressional mandate for jointness, the creation of US SOCOM, and a steadily expanding set of SOF capabilities, missions, and core tasks. Dr. Wilson and others have argued that this age ended along with our 2 decades-long campaign in Afghanistan and Iraq, coupled with pressing requirements to rebalance the force for influence campaigning and integrated deterrence. This puts us at the threshold of a new 4th age of SOF. With that, I'll kick it back over to Dr. Wilson. Thank you.
Thanks, Shane. Let me folks try to put a little bit more framing on this 4th age that Shane's really set us up for in the historical walkabout. So if we could go to the next slide, please. The 4th age is a period of history of special operations and special operations forces, unlike any previous period in several respects. This 4th age is marked by a clear exploitation of traditional Western institutions and influence, especially at fragile geographic and sectoral nexes, and with the Russians and Chinese openly no longer playing by established rules and norms. Case in point, Ukraine, case in point, South China Sea, case in point, Taiwan, et cetera, et cetera. Now, one need look no further for examples than China's terraforming island building activities and Russia's little green men territorial incursions, and today which have evolved, or dare I say devolved, into outright sins of aggression and invasion. Special operations will need to become an even more teaming partner in integrated statecraft solutions, more often than not leading in that integrativeness to deal with these compound security threat dynamics, these interplays of a growing great power, a revanchist wannabe returning to once upon a time a great power of a Putin's Russia, an ascendant great power in a Xi's China, as individual discrete threats, great growing threat powers in and of themselves, but importantly, as those state threats combine in some multiplicative way with the remaining threats on the international stage. Regional threats such as the DPRK, Iran, as well as that threat has not gone away, and in fact has metastasized into new forms, the threat of non-state actors, violent extremist organizations, the like, but not limited to Al-Qaeda in the so-called Islamic State. All that a part of a rebalance, not a pivot or a shift from any of those things, but some type of unfortunate, unavoidable combination, multiplicative combination of those threats. The strategic rebalance that SOF and special operations need to and must be vanguard to, on the leading edge of, anticipating, going back to SOF's core traditions of Sentinel, global scouting. This is the imperative of the 4th age. Now, looking ahead, SOF force structure, capabilities, and design will also likely need to adapt significantly to this new era. And in this 4th age, geography has returned with a vengeance, and as a governing dynamic of international relations, once again, positional advantage is once again a determinative factor of this new compound security world disorder. If we go to the next slide, please. Just a quick picture here of the One Belt, One Road centerpiece, and those yellow dots denoting critical nodes, not just for this 21st century version of China's Belt and Road Initiative, but those nodes being deliberately grand strategically selected because those mark spots on the world globe map, on the world system map, that have been historically, cyclically critical points on the map of where physical geography and physical threat comes into nexus and confrontation, convergence with human security. Those we call the commanding heights. And whoever commands the commanding heights dominates the world system. We believe the fourth age is going to portend and bring forth a demand that requires SOF, joint, combined, allied, and partnered, leading integrated statecraft solutions, JSOU, joint interagency, intergovernmental, multinational, and commercial force configurations, applying the 12 core activities in traditional configurations, as well as in new configurations, perhaps identifying and giving birth to new core activities and core tasks. Again, JSOU, not just military, dime fill, all the acronyms come into play here in posturing and preparing as force platform and command and control nodes at or proximate to these nexus and nodal locations. Again, those who command and control those commanding heights and do so in true, genuine partnerships, as opposed to transactional client relationships, more the likes of what a China and a Russia can muster. While there may be many battles, in some of those battles, steps backward, relative losses, those who command the commanding heights, as this graphic in broad strokes shows, will be in a position to actually win the competitions short of conflict and war in this fourth age. If we go forward to the next slide, please. Now, a very simple graphic here, actually quite cartoonish, but it really tells the key point. And I'm going to end on this point, and I'll turn it over to Shane for some final comments, and we'll call it a scene setter complete. But as the cartoon shows, you see a full continuum of competition, from cooperation, competition, conflict, and high-end war. You see markers on the slide indicating those moments of what we call epochal, systems-changing wars, great power wars. And what comes out of those great power wars? Grand peaces, compacts, going back to the Treaty of Augsburg 1515 through Treaty of Westphalia, to our most recent great power war ending treaty, the Paris Peace Treaty of 1990, that ended the Cold War, the final battles of a long war that began pre-World War I. What is SOF's role, and what has it been in all across this entire spectrum of peace and warfare? It has been doing two things simultaneously: lowering the amplitude and the temperature of competition and conflict between competitors, and at the same time, deterring and preventing a next great power war from happening at all by extending the periods of relative peace through the application of irregular warfare, short of war, left of the booms, winning without fighting, and in a manner that provides a posture and a preparedness that if and when conflict and war comes, that the nation's conventional and unconventional forces in collective action are indomitable and can provide those overmatching compound wins. SOF as rheostat, SOF as sentinel, special operations in active gray zone campaigning. And with that, I'll turn it over real quick. I see our time is up. I'll leave the last word to our great SOF leader operator, Command Sergeant Major Shane Shorter, to close us out, and we'll call it a scene set. Shane, over to you.
Thanks, Dr. Wilson. I'll just take a short amount of time here and try to close this thing out. The scene setter. There's no doubt that SOF demonstrates use and utility in the fourth age, as it has for the previous three. And ultimately, this value, our value proposition for the nation we serve, is a function of our people. As SOF truth number one simply states, humans are more important than hardware. Our people are carefully selected based on uncommon talent, uniquely trained and educated to perform special tasks in an extraordinary manner. They are self-disciplined and self-confident. They demonstrate mature judgment and uncompromising integrity, enabling them to thrive in new, ambiguous, and complex situations that demand equal mastery of human and technological dimensions. In short, our modern SOF forces are exquisite, refined by 3 distinct ages and their associated demands. And our 4th age SOF, further empowered by education and technology, will be even more capable of serving our national interests in at least 5 ways. First, they will serve as geostrategic shapers, giving the Joint Force positional and informational advantage over our competitors and adversaries. Second, they will serve as an exceptional and versatile agent of influence. Third, they will contribute in unique ways to a strategy of integrated deterrence. Fourth, they will improve America's ability to pursue ideological extremists and WMD proliferators. And fifth, they will prepare special operations options for both traditional warfare and crisis response contingencies. These are the uses and utilities of SOF, as relevant now as they have been at any previous moment in history. And they are the ones that which we must relentlessly train and educate our people to accomplish. Thanks, Dr. Wilson, and thanks. I'll kick it back now.
Thanks, Shane, and back over to our gracious hosts. Thanks, everyone, and have a wonderful 2 days of forum. Cheers.
Thank you, Dr. Wilson and Sergeant Major Shorter, for that excellent scene setter.